It's Tanya, and today I wanted to talk about some books that have interested me that I consider famous people have written. So there's a lot of books I want to go through, so let's get started. The first book that I wanted to talk about was Down the Drain, and it's written by Julia Fox. And I feel like her book is so interesting because her life is wild. It's going through how she has had a lot of life trauma due to her family being extremely neglectful and her mother not wanting to be a mom. And so she even lived for a while with her grandpa in Italy. So it really talks about how her life was kind of a struggle as she was young and how that kind of affected her life going forward. She mainly was living out of the States as she was younger. And so it's talking about how she, again, was out of the States, but she moved back to America and she ended up becoming a drug user from kind of an early age. The reason why she moves back to America was she had this gangster boyfriend that she met, and it talks about how he was very abusive towards her and how he would give her drugs, and that would just make their relationship be wild and fun and crazy. Eventually, when she decides to leave this man, he ends up stalking her and kind of controlling her life from an outside source. And so he would have people around her, like different things. He would send her messages, he would send her emails, he would have people deliver messages. It was wild, and this guy just would not let it go. He kept trying to control her life. He does this despite him being in jail and him not having access to the average things. He's still doing all of this. She continues with her drug usage, and her life is just very difficult during the process since she continues to go back to this, and she does overdose a couple times and almost dies. But one of my favorite parts of the books was she was a dominatrix for a while, and so it was talking about how this helps her financially get some stuff done, and she eventually meets this other boyfriend who really takes care of her financially. He started kind of as a sugar daddy, and then eventually they have this relationship, and how he helps her start a business. He helps her have a really nice place to stay, and he does all of these things for her, and despite it, she's still just not into him, and she finds this other guy and she's in a relationship with him while she's still in a relationship with this sugar daddy slash boyfriend slash, I'm not exactly sure how it works, but he gets really hurt by this, and she continues to go back to this other guy that's not really good for her. And despite all this, she's still on drugs, she's still struggling with this addiction, and eventually she goes to Alcoholics Anonymous and gets clean for a while but goes back to drugs once again. She eventually gets married and gets pregnant and has a baby despite this husband not wanting to have this baby, and that relationship again was very toxic. It talks about her being in a relationship with a person that tries to control every single thing that she does, and it kind of alludes to a famous person. It's basically her not being willing to say a name, and I think that's probably good to protect yourself from having somebody's name out there and getting sued for it or something. But I thought it was interesting how she continues to have these relationships that are hurting her, but she also is doing drugs. But she does a lot better when she has a son. She names him Valentino. She starts to work with this husband and tries to really have him see the importance of being in the son's life, and he starts doing better once she does this work to try to help him see that. She is really trying to do a lot of work to empower women and empower them, to get out of bad relationships, to be the symbol of a woman that is going through all these life circumstances, but still able to be strong through them and finding the importance of taking care of herself and things like that. So anyway, I think Julia Fox's book was just wild and wacky, and I just thought it was interesting because it was like a roller coaster the whole time. And so I would say it was a fun book. The next book was The Woman in Me by Britney Spears, and I loved it. Of course, we had the Free Britney movement, and so I was always interested to see her side of the story because there was so much going on behind the scenes that we didn't see while she was in the conservatorship. The book talks about how her family was just taking advantage of her all along the way, and she was forced into this conservatorship that just completely took over her life and completely went against most of the things she wanted. She was forced into it, and they would basically use her children against her. And her dad was one of the main conservators, but he also would employ this outside source to try to help out with it, but really they were allegedly embezzling her money and doing all these things to take money away from her to take it for themselves. And I really felt for her because it was basically like she was a prisoner in her own home when they wouldn't let her, spend her own money on herself. But meanwhile, they would go buy this fancy house for their vacation home, and they would go on vacations, these things, or go on these lavish vacations with her money, when meanwhile they were forcing her to work 13 years. It's going through and explaining all the things that were going behind the scenes, and like she was in a relationship and they wouldn't even let her have autonomy over her own body because they were trying to control her, and they forced her to be on different kinds of birth control when she wanted to have more of a family. And it was just sad to see that people around her own family, were so corrupt, and they wanted the money for themselves, so they weren't willing to let her have this happy, healthy life. Eventually, she was able to speak up for herself, and it was during this major court hearing, and she said, "I want help. I'm not getting help. I want out of the conservatorship." She didn't have legal counsel. It was all her dad's legal counsel, or people that were being used against her. Like even her bodyguards or people working around her would report back to her dad, and like her phones were tapped and different things like that. So it went through her process of getting autonomy over her own body, autonomy over her own life. And I thought it was really empowering to see that she was able to stand up for herself after being, brainwashed for so many years, that she deserved to be in this conservatorship when in reality it was people taking a bunch of her money. After she finally got good legal advice, they were able to get her out of the conservatorship, but I felt like it dragged on. I felt like I wanted her to get out immediately, but they, kept her in it for a while. But once she had this backing of a good legal counsel, she was able to get out of this conservatorship. And she was talking about how a lot of her family wasn't really on her side. They were using her court hearings and stuff to profit off of it. And I just can't imagine my own family completely being against me in a way where they're actively trying to hurt me, basically. But once she got free, she was able to get married. She was able to decide if she wanted to have kids, and she's still fighting these legal battles to make her family pay, and these companies that they hire to keep her in this conservatorship. But I was encouraged by all that she had to go through and her ability to get through it and still have control over her life and not, go crazy during the process. I can't imagine. But again, I would highly recommend it. She is a good storyteller and able to go through her story. Because I went over Britney Spears, I felt like it was a good time to go over Paris Hilton's book, and it's called Paris, but it's her memoir. And I, over the years, have felt like Paris Hilton is an amazing businesswoman. I think that she is way smarter than people give her credit for, because she's created this character of who she is, and it's this ditzy blonde, but in reality she's this business tycoon woman that's doing all of these great things and building an empire. And I don't know, she's so well spoken, she's so encouraging and empowering to hear. But her book is going through how she had ADHD and how people in her life were were trying to fix her when in reality it could be a strength. And she went through how she just loved dancing, she loved going out to parties, and she loved building her status as a socialite to her advantage. And she did get into the point where she was, getting wasted, and she's like not proud of negative that came out of that, but she's also encouraged by the ability to be a businesswoman during that process even. And it talked about how she got into modeling and how her family wasn't exactly into that. They didn't want her to do it. She was sneaking out and doing this job and, building her business career in the way that she saw fit. Eventually, her family decided that enough was enough, and they sent her to this camp. It was like a boarding school called CEDU, CEDU, and it was created by Mel Wasserman. I can't remember his name. Mel Wasserman, and it was really a cult-like mentality. They would abuse these kids and act like they were helping them and act like they were doing all these great things for them, when in reality they were abusing all these kids and forcing them to do these awful things. Like, for example, they would all have a group meeting, and it was trying to teach them how to, like, what are you doing wrong and what can you do better? But really it was all these kids ganging up on a kid saying like, you're awful, you're this, you're that, and it's like giving them all of this trash talk about themselves, when in reality there were, other therapeutic options that they could have done that was healthier. What I forgot to mention is CEDU, they would literally kidnap children in front of their parents. Like they would come into the house in the middle of the night while the kid was sleeping, and they would drag them out of their bed and hold them down and throw them in a car. And it was just something that was made a lot more traumatic than it really needed to be. And the parents thought they were helping, and they thought they were sending them to this nice boarding school, when in reality these kids were getting attacked, and they were even getting beat up, and they were having these like perverted type leaders of the school that were old graduates, but they were doing these like not so great sexual things to these kids. She was finally released from this place around her 18th birthday. The abuse she endured, she was able to beat it, and she was able to live through it, and she was doing all this advocacy to help children that were put in these kinds of scenarios so that it doesn't continue to happen. And she was able to get things closed down, but she does all this advocacy work to help people see that these places are not used to help kids, they're used to attack them. I was encouraged by her book. I felt like, again, I've always thought she was an amazing woman, but I could also see all of this advocacy work that she's doing on top of it. So again, I would recommend the book because it goes through a lot of all the stuff that she had to go through at CEDU. The next book was Spare by Prince Harry, and he had a ghostwriter. So I think that makes it an autobiography rather than like a memoir or a biography. Anyway, he had some help with it, but it's going through his life growing up as a prince of England and talking about how he was kind of known as the spare because his brother was the one that would eventually get the throne, and he was around. They literally called him the spare because if something happened to his brother, like he needed a kidney, they would literally like use him to give his brother a kidney and stuff like that. So I thought that was really sad. I don't know. I feel like a lot of his story is talking about how his family was not really there for him and how he was doing all this advocacy work. He was doing all of these things to help the environment, to help Africa, to do all these things, but his philanthropy work was all that they cared about rather than him. Eventually he talks about like his accolades. He joins the military and he does all this hard work for the military and he does these like really crazy jobs, but meanwhile these different countries were trying to threaten his life while he was in the military, so he had to do these odd jobs because they would try to hurt him and the people around him, so they had to have him in these like more covert type of jobs. One of the main things things that his book talks about is the paparazzi and how the media is used against them almost. Like the royal family, they pit them against each other. Like they have their own media teams for the different people within the family, and sometimes they'll put out these stories about their family members to make themselves look better, to kind of climb the platform. And it talks about how the paparazzi were relentless. They would literally follow him, hound him, like make life dangerous for him because they wouldn't leave him alone and put his life in danger even sometimes. And eventually he meets Meg Markle, and it's talking about how they get to know each other, how they meet, how they start this romance, how they do this. But the media is like extremely racist against her, and they're doing all these things, and his family isn't letting him protect her. And eventually they get married, and he's like, I am not protecting my wife. What does that look like? And they're like, well, we don't get to protect our women, so like you just have to like deal with it. You just like don't make a big deal about it. And it's just this thing where Meg is being attacked like all the time, and eventually they decide to leave. They decide to resign their role as like Duke of Sussex, and they decide to just start their own lives. And it talks about how financially it becomes this huge burden because the paparazzi are literally hunting them down, and there's like helicopters in the air, there's people like trying to get into their home, and it talks about how they have to hire security, but it's extremely expensive to hire private security. And so it just was wild how the media was basically against them the whole time. Also, when I say that they resigned their role, it's more like they were almost pushed out or kicked out, but they called it resigning basically. I don't know. I thought it was an interesting book because it does go through a lot of his advocacy work. It goes through, all of his life circumstances before, like when he was like younger, and like time was with his mom. And I thought it was interesting to see a life that's so different than mine, and a lot of these people's lives are a lot different than mine. The next book was The Half of It, and it's written by Madison. I read this one quite a long time ago, but I felt like it was a good one to add because like famous people, I always have enjoyed her music. Her book is going through the difficulty of growing up in the spotlight because she was found by Justin Bieber, and he kind of gave her this platform to become famous and to be recognized for her talent. He saw something in her, and so I thought it was interesting to see how one day she's this like normal girl, and then all of a sudden she's like shoved into the spotlight. She also talks about her struggle with media, like social media, all of it, because she gets attacked a lot because of looks. She is a beautiful woman, and so a lot of people think that her looks are fake and they're not natural, and they accuse her of having plastic surgery. She's like, well, I mean, I'm pretty natural. It's just like what I've been given, and people attack her and body shame her and do these awful things and just talk about her in these bad ways, and it leads her to have mental health struggles, because if you're constantly hearing all these awful things about yourself, then like you start to kind of believe them. And so it talks about her struggles of thoughts of ending her life and how she's able to traverse all of that. She talks about how she's like so blessed to have the platform that she's been given, and she talks about how blessed and thankful she is, but there's also struggles along the way that come with it. I just liked that she had both of those. Like you can still have this like great advantage that you've been given, but still have struggles because of it. So I just was encouraged by her ability to speak out against that kind of thing. The next book is Greenlights by Matthew McConaughey. I would definitely recommend the audiobook. I didn't read the physical book. I listened to the audiobook, and he's an actor. He includes his voice, and I don't think you would read it the same way as if you hear it. It's his memoir. It's like a classic memoir, and he's written diaries over the years, and he's taking those and creating a book. He's just a good storyteller. He makes it fun to listen to the stories because of like the inflection in his voice, and he talks about how he started in film and how he had this passion for it, and it came naturally to him, and he got a lot of these opportunities for rom-coms because he just did so well in them. He talked about how it was a hobby that turned into a job, and he loved it for so long, and eventually he wants to pursue the different kinds of movies and like do different things rather than just rom-coms, and how the industry kind of wanted to keep him in that box, and it took some time to get him into a new kind of character area. And so I don't know, I think he really enjoys traveling around the world and changing his portfolio over time. So I just thought it was a fun book. I think he's a good storyteller. The next book that I would say you definitely need to listen to the audiobook as well is Leslie Effing Jones. Now, that's not exactly what it says, but you'll kind of see it. But it's just, I liked the audiobook because she's written this book, but she completely goes off script during the audiobook. And so she even adds in stories that weren't a part of the book. And it was just a really funny way of doing it. I've never heard, a person going off script, but she's a comedian, so she would add in these funny little things. And it definitely goes through, her life. A lot of her book goes through how it's a struggle to get into, comedy, or it's a difficulty to get into like become famous when you're a Black woman, because you're not given the opportunities. Like even Black men were saying like, oh, the world isn't ready for women, like comedy isn't ready for women. And she's like, no, yeah, I am. Like, yes, it is. And so it was talking about her struggles with being famous and how people would attack her because of things that she would say. And I thought it was interesting to see, how she grew up and how media has treated her during the process. But she talks about like, I know I'm good at comedy. I can do it well. I worked really hard to get to the point where I am. And so I just thought it was a fun book. And again, listen to the audiobook 100%. The next book that I read was From Here to the Great Unknown by Lisa Marie Presley. And it's her daughter is kind of writing the book because her mom had passed away, but it's going through her mom's life and what it was like growing up with Elvis Presley and how her life was, going through all of this life stuff in Graceland, and how, when she grew up, her dad was kind of a wacky guy, so she could get away with almost anything. And she had this golf cart and she would like drive around and play with the paparazzi or play with the fans, and she had free reign. It was talking about her life growing up with him and then her life after he was gone, and the struggles that being in this public eye caused when her father had passed away. And so I thought it was a cool book going through all of her life. It was a fun book. I think it's a good read. So you can check that one out as well. The last book, Dinner for Vampires. It is life on a cult TV show while also in an actual cult by Bethany Jo Lance. And I loved this book. I thought it was so interesting because it's talking about how she met this community of people while she was starting her fame and starting her life in film and in TV shows and things like that. And started out as a Bible study, and then this guy comes in and he kind of takes over, and it's his Bible study. They see each other as a family because they're also supportive of each other. They'll do anything for each other, and it starts out like just, I think smart people are a part of cults. That's like something that I just think smart people are in cults. It's not dumb people. It's people that sometimes just want to challenge in life. It's something that, people just somehow accidentally get into. And so it talks about how she's going through a life of fame, but also in this cult, but she doesn't realize it's cult at first. And so she eventually gets into One Tree Hill, and she, working this job where she's on a TV show, but she doesn't hang out with the cast and stuff because she has this family that's telling her, hey, you need to be godly, you need to follow God's rules, you need to not put yourself around people that can cause your downfall. And so she was very isolated during it while she's working with all of these talented people. And so it was interesting that the family would kind of control little things at a time, and she didn't realize it in the background. Eventually, she's wanting a relationship, but she can't date these people around her because they're not Christians. And so back at home, like at the cult, she would go and visit pretty regularly, and eventually she thinks that she has a crush on the leader's son, but she feels like she's kind of also forcing it. So it's interesting because the cult leader, he's like, oh yeah, like you're definitely in love, and he kind of like forces her into this marriage with his son because he wants to take advantage of her financially. They eventually get a hold of her financials, and they start becoming her team that like helps her, get jobs and different things like that. She didn't have control of her own finances. They were like doing everything for her. Her husband moves out with her to be on the One Tree Hill, and he starts trying to control every aspect of her life. And she was told, you have to obey your husband. He's your spiritual leader and your spiritual guide. And so she is trying to follow his guidance, but he's even telling her what she can and can't wear. Eventually, she has a child with him, and he just continues to control, and she tries to ask him, hey, like your family, like I need you to kind of like be with me, not, listen to everything your family has to say. Like we need to work on our marriage. And he is just not willing to. He wants to listen to his family and like hear everything that they have to say rather than like what she has to say. And so eventually that marriage is like doomed to fail. Eventually she realizes that she's in a cult after, One Tree Hill, and she's able to get out, and her family is able to support her as she gets out. And they had basically been cut out of her life because they called them the bio family, and really the cult is your family. They're, your real family. And so her family was just overjoyed when she was able to like come back to them. And her dad had been compiling research, and so she's able to eventually, after like spending almost all her money, get custody of her daughter, and her ex-husband would get visitation. It's just how they're trying to destroy her life after she left and try to like destroy everything that she's built. And they even took millions of dollars from her. It just talks about how, she has to transition back into normal life, and how it's like her support system is gone and she has to find this new support system. And it's people from her life that realized she was in a cult, and were trying to help her, but she like couldn't accept the help at the time because she thought that they were being manipulative or whatever. So I just thought it was a great book, and it's like educating people after she gets out of the cult to see, hey, no, like smart people are in cult, and when people are like, oh, like I would never fall for that, and she's like educating them to see like you're making these judgments that you don't really know anything about. And so I don't know, it was a great book, highly recommend it. I listened to the audiobook again, and she reads her own book, and so it was really cool to hear it from her own voice, and that kind of thing. So yeah, those are all the books that I wanted to do. I think there's like 9 of them, but I just I've been reading a lot, I've been listening to a lot of books, but I just really enjoy finally being able to learn. And so my tip of the day would be, listen to an audiobook. If you can't sit and read a book, feel free to get an audiobook and listen to it, because I feel like I've been able to learn so much now that I'm listening to books. I just feel like I am getting so educated on the world around me. I'm learning a lot about history. I'm learning about a lot about like people's lives that are different than me. And so that would be my tip of the day. That's all I have for you today. I hope that you have a wonderful day. Don't talk to strangers unless they give you candy, and I'll see you next time. Bye.